Thank you much. Thank you very much, Brian, and welcome. Thank you all for coming today. Given that the theme of today's talks is really, can you relate? I thought it might be interesting and fun to begin to talk about how do you relate? And in particular, how do you interact with others in a professional setting? I do work for a business school after all, so much of what I'll talk about is related to your business and professional life. So what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the networks you have, the relationships that you've built, the position you have in those networks, in other words, your social capital, and how you can use that, leverage that, to help your organization achieve its goals and how you can develop professional success. Now, just as a kind of a disclaimer or giving credit where credit is due, a lot of what I'll talk about today is based on the work of David Knoke at the University of Minnesota and one of my colleagues at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, Ron Burt. So if you think about your organization, whether you're a startup, whether you're a large organization, there are 4 types of capital that you need to make the operation go. The first of these is financial capital. No surprise there. We all need money to fund our operations. We need to pay the rent. We need to pay our employees. We need to buy inventory and supplies. So I think most of us are pretty familiar with the concept of financial capital. We think about our own budgeting, our own dollars and cents regularly. We try to manage them appropriately. So we keep track of that in a very, very real sense. The second form of capital that one needs is physical capital. And so here you've got a big picture of a Boeing airplane being built. So physical capital is anything from machinery to the pens and paper that you use in the office every day. Again, physical capital is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. We track our inventory. We maintain our machinery and our computers. We replace them on a regular cycle. So we manage our physical capital pretty well. The third area of capital that we think about in an organization is our human capital. That's what you have inside of you, your education, your expertise, your experience, the skills that you bring to your organization. And again, I think most of us think pretty long and hard about our human capital, and we're always trying to improve it. We go for training courses, we get degrees, we try to develop connections that will give us interesting new ideas. So we're all regularly thinking about our human capital, how we're going to improve it, and how we can use it for our own personal success as well as that of our organizations. The fourth bit of capital, though, is our social capital. And it's a little bit different than the other 3. I think in general, we don't think about social capital in the same way we think about the other forms of capital. Oftentimes we take it for granted. We may not know really what it is. We don't typically treat it as a real asset, and we don't effectively manage it in a day-to-day basis. So one of the things I want to talk through today is a little bit how do we think about managing that social capital? And the first thing to talk about is what really is social capital. And it's really a combination of a couple of things. It is really an asset, and it truly is an asset, just like any other physical asset or financial asset, that has value in it. And your social capital is how you can create value from your networks, from your relationships, from your position in those relationships and networks, and how you can use that value, those relationships, to create advantage for your firm and your organization. So in essence, it's a combination of your reputation, your relationships, and using the 2 of them to drive results for your firm. So if you have a strong reputation, you have solid relationships, you can drive significant results for your organization and for yourself. So why does it matter? Why do we care about social capital? What will it get for you? So most of these things are probably no big surprise to you, but your position in your network, your relationships provide you with significant information. You may learn things faster than other people in your organization if you have the right connections. You may have greater influence. You may learn things and be able to control information and therefore have influence over the decisions that are made in your organization. You may get support through your network, either professional support, encouraging you to take a new role, take on a new responsibility, or it might be personal, emotional support if you're going through a tough time. Your networks provide that to you as well. Your networks can be a significant provider of ideas, new ways of thinking about business problems, new ways of coming up with solutions. innovative ideas to help build your organization and help build your own expertise. Clearly, your social capital also provides you with resources, whether money, people, time, to help you achieve your goals. And finally, it can give you access. Your social capital may provide you the opportunity to make a phone call to someone who will actually pick up the phone and listen to you and ask, what can I do to help you? So your social capital and your networks are incredibly important, both for you as an individual, but also for you as an organization. And so developing that social capital, managing it effectively, is incredibly important for your future financial and professional success. So, how is it measured? How do you think about social capital? How can you describe what social capital is really about for you? The first thing is you might think, well, the size of your network. And the immediate idea is that the bigger your network, the greater your social capital. Well, on one hand, that might be true. But if you think about it, you all have limited amounts of time. And managing all of those relationships takes time. And as soon as you start spending time on too many relationships, all of your relationships start to suffer. So there's actually a balance between the number of relationships and what they can do for you, and the amount of time that you want to spend on them. So it's not simply a matter of amassing thousands of Facebook friends or collecting a huge stack of business cards at the latest conference, but rather being strategic about how many relationships can I actively manage that are going to be helpful to me in my career. Similarly, social capital can be measured by the strength of your connections. How deep are your relationships with others? Do you connect with people daily, weekly, monthly? How do you interact with them? Are you kind of soulmates, if you will? Again, you might think that the deeper your relationships, the stronger your social capital. But that, again, may or may not be the case. You have the time issue once again. Developing deep and long-lasting relationships takes a lot of time. And you may not want to spend all that time because you're going to be ignoring some of your other relationships. The other thing that happens is when you have very, very deep and connected relationships, you tend to focus on one another. You focus on those relationships to the exclusion of others. Therefore, you're kind of eliminating some of the need and some of the connection that you might have with other important relationships as well. So you need to think a little bit about, in the strength of your connections, which ones need to be daily connections, which ones connections and which networks can be, well, we'll get a beer every now and again, and which connections ought to be simply, I will call you periodically to see what's up. So again, strategically, you need to think, how strong do those relationships need to be, and how do I manage them effectively? The third area of measurement in thinking about social capital is the breadth of your connections. How many different connections do you have that provide you with different things? Different ideas, different organizations, different ways of thinking about the world. Again, in general, the broader your connections, the better off. You're going to have access to different ideas, access to different resources, access to different influences. But again, there are some potential drawbacks. Breadth does not mean simply more connections. Here's a little example. Network A, Network B, Network C. You could be in the middle. You have 4 connections in Network A. You have 8 connections in Network B. And you've got 16 in Network C. Each of those networks is basically equivalent to you. From a social capital standpoint, these 3 networks are identical. You're getting the same information, the same resources, because the connections in each of these more dense networks provide the same information. So as an example, if I have a very, very strong connection with Mary, and Mary has a connection with David and John, I may not need a connection with David and John because I can get everything I need from her connections to them through her. I might be better off spending my time in developing a connection with Stephanie, who comes from a different organization and has different ideas and different influences that can be beneficial to me. So again, if you think about the breadth of your connections, think about how broadly, how different they can be, rather than making lots of connections into the same group of people. You'll be better off in the long term. And finally, we can think about social capital from the structure of the network. How dense is your network, and what degree of openness does it have? So here's a bit of an example. So we can think of this is a sociogram of an organization, kind of a fictional organization. But you can think about it as a company that has maybe a sales and marketing group here in the red, and maybe a data analytics group here in the blue, and a strategic planning group in the green and yellow. And you can see that this organization, as many organizations, seems to be siloed. The sales and marketing group isn't really well connected with strategic planning, and nobody's really well connected to the data analytics group. You'll also notice that there are two individuals here. So each of these dots represents an individual. James and Robert, both in the sales and marketing group, both have the same number of connections in their network. But you'll note that the two of them have different kinds of connections. Robert has connections into both the data analytics and the strategic planning group. He bridges this hole between the two organizations. He has access to information from the data team and from the strategic planning team that James just doesn't have. So Robert has an interesting position. His social capital may actually be higher in this organization because of the connections he has, because of his ability to gain access to that information. He may hear a strategic direction that's being developed that he can then present to his team in sales and marketing. He may be able to provide sales and marketing information to the data analytics team, and he becomes kind of a catalyst in this organization for influence, for access, and ultimately for his own personal success. And there's a fair amount of research that goes into that suggests that people are in these brokerage roles who bridge these spans between organizations actually do achieve more in their organizations. They have greater promotions, they have greater responsibility, they get involved in more important projects in their organizations. So one of the takeaways for you all is to think about, how do I span organizational holes in my company? How do I provide bridges to other organizations, to other people, to gain access to their ideas, their influence, and their resources? That's not to say, however, that a network that looks like the red one here, a fairly dense network of people that know one another well, that interact together regularly, there are benefits to that as well. Particularly in things like, say you're a McDonald's franchisee. You run a McDonald's. You don't want your folks flipping hamburgers to kind of regularly think about, how can I create a new hamburger today? How can I think about cooking my hamburgers differently today? You want everybody operating the same way. So a dense network that's well connected, that doesn't have a lot of outside influences, can get a lot of things done very, very quickly. They're efficient, they talk together, they develop ideas together, and they are extremely good at getting results. So one of the things you might want to think about in terms of where you're headed with your organization is, what kinds of roles do I need to play? Where does bridging happen, and where do I need to close down and become efficient? And finally, if we talk about the reputation piece of our social capital, these are things that you probably learned as a kindergartner. How do you develop an appropriate reputation within your organization and without your organization? Things like trust, integrity, consistency, clearly competence. You want to be known as being good at your job. And finally, reciprocity. Anytime you're going to be in a network, it is a reciprocal arrangement, a reciprocal relationship. You need to be both giving and taking to develop that appropriate reputation. So, in managing your social capital, things you need to think about. One is, what are your goals? Am I trying to get ideas, develop new ways of thinking about world problems, new ways of thinking about my own organization and how I can develop? Do I need to have an organization that's open to new ideas, or do we need to have an organization that's closed down and focused on efficiency and getting results? Or do I need a combination of both? How are you going to manage your time? What kind of time do I want to spend on which kinds of relationships? And how do I manage those effectively? Which ones need deep relationships? Which ones need minimal relationships? What connections and resources do I need? Do I need money? Do I need contacts? Do I need influence? And which parts of my network are going to provide those to me? And finally, how broad does my network have to be to provide those things to me? So we think about this quote kind of epitomizes what I think is true of our social capital. It is truly an asset, one that you need to think about how to manage, how to develop, and just as you do with your money and your physical resources, you need to think about, how am I going to manage my social capital as well? And finally, as Mickey Rourke, the actor, once said, a reputation is really hard to live down, So as you're thinking about your social capital and the reputation you want to build, keep this in mind. Make sure that the reputation you're building, the connections you're building, are the ones that are going to be successful for you. So thank you very much.